This is 2025. The Russians have invaded Ukraine, and they have kidnapped, we think, 19,546 Ukrainian children away from their families in Ukraine, brought them to Russia in some form, and the teenagers, they're training them to fight their own country. What's the right answer? Do something about it. Get off our ass as a world and make this like unacceptable. So there are, 4 countries under U.S. law that have the designation of being a state sponsor of terrorism. We're here today to say you need to add one more. So this legislation, if passed, would designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism under U.S. law until they return the children.
So there was Lindsey Graham. I guess that was yesterday here in the United States, making a big, bold declaration that Russia is a state sponsor of terrorism, and we're going to write that into law to give President Trump some more tools to try to help bring this war to an end. So says the senator. But we see Patrick Henningsen there, who is our guest today, host of Sunday Wire, patrickhenningsen.substack.com, who is already shaking his head. And I have the idea that you have some commentary to make. So please, the floor is yours.
That's a hell of a clip to lead off with there, Daniel. It's, that's a raving lunatic, Lindsey Graham. I have no idea what he's talking about. They keep fishing for new designations in order to, pass new sanctions or to levy new, sanctions or, punitive measures against Russia, because everything they've done to date hasn't worked. So that's obvious problem there. What he's talking about is a complete canard. And this is actually the basis for the fake indictment against Putin and one of the other leading Russian officials that's been on the docket there at the ICC in The Hague for almost 2 years now. And that's that Russia abducted, by anyone's estimation, depends who you talk to, 100,000 or, 1 million Ukrainian children or whatever. This has been so thoroughly debunked.
I think the number he used there was 19,000 or something. But what is the truth behind that?
The truth is there were children, some of which their families were split up because of the war in Donbass and other areas where there was fighting along that region, Lugansk and Donetsk specifically. And there are also children from group homes, orphanages as well, families that have been, again, split up because of the fighting. And Russia provided exfiltration, safe haven for these children. They also gave the parents the option to send the children to like the equivalent of holiday camps across the border in mainland Russia, which many thousands did. And so the basis of that was a Yale University academic that did a report in absentia, has never been on the ground in Donbass or Ukraine or Russia, and submitted this bogus report. This has been the Gray. Jeremy Lafredo actually went there for the Gray Zone, who is one of the best independent journalists, I think, out there. And he investigated these so-called camps where they're teaching classical music and doing all these things for these kids who are from this war-torn zone. And also the fact that all of the basis for the ICC indictment, what they use for reports, is all derivative from this one bogus U.S. academic report from someone at Yale University. We also did a write-up on this at 21st Century Wire a while ago. So, I mean, anybody who's actually looked into any of these claims in any real detail, any serious look, knows that this was a completely politicized, fabricated case. And they've also fabricated other versions of this. I don't know which fabricated case Lindsey Graham is talking about. It could be one of 2 or 3. I'm not sure. I don't think he knows, quite frankly. But it's to say Russia's a state sponsor of terror because they're like mass abducting Ukrainian children is patently ridiculous.
Yeah, one of the things he did say on there was that not only have they abducted them, they are teaching them to go to war against their own countrymen. I don't know if you knew that.
Well, Lindsey, you should go and check out what happened in Crimea. after the Nazis took over in Ukraine after the Maidan, how many defections there were from the Ukrainian army over to the Crimean side or to the Russian side, how many defections there were from the Ukrainian military over to the militia, the self-defense forces in Donetsk and Lugansk. I mean, we're talking significant numbers. In fact, they provided the backbone of the resistance to what Petro Poroshenko was calling an anti-terror operation. The U.S. installed Puppet, the first president after the Yatsenyuk caretaker government that Victoria Nuland put into place. Petro Poroshenko dubbed everybody in Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbass as terrorists, the entire population, and used his military against his own people. They were part of Ukraine at the time, you have to remember. So this is supposed to be the sin of all sins, according to the West, using the military against your own people. This is what they justified the NATO bombing against Gaddafi in Libya. And it's also what they justified umpteen sanctions for over a decade against Syria, using the, quote, military against your own people. Both of those examples, which I've just said, there's no evidence to support that on any of those cases either. So this is just another bogus, trumped up, fitted up case by the United States once again, in order to somehow justify some other, extreme actions, be they military or economic.
What do you think, though, is best you can divine from this, if that's possible? What is the intent here? I mean, what does Lindsey Graham and all those other senators up on the dais, what do they imagine that this is going to positively do? What other flexibility is this going to give to Trump? I can't come up with how this is going to help.
I don't know. I mean, they really look. People in Washington believe that this will work, even if it's not working now, and even if it hasn't worked for the last 3 years. They believe it's going to work because they do have. They'll look at the Syria situation and they'll say, "Look, we just need to keep at it. Eventually, we're going to break Russia. Eventually, we're going to break their economy. Eventually, we're going to turn the people against Putin, and we'll be able to, somehow build some kind of a fifth column opposition movement, like we did with Navalny, which wasn't an opposition movement at all. And then somehow, if we just keep at it, like we did with the Cold War, I mean, people in Washington are addicted to these tropes from the past, these patterns that they believe led them to past victory. And they think, well, we did it with Assad, but, Syria is a totally different. In Syria, they had Turkey running aggression from the north. They used Jordan as a staging ground for jihadist fighters trained by the U.S. and British to go over as the Free Syrian Army and ISIS fighters eventually from Jordan. Israel was also launching airstrikes on Syria for a decade. Plus, you had all the jihadi fighters coming over the Turkish border as well. Plus, all U.S. occupation of northeastern Syria. Plus, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. I mean, so they had Syria in a vice grip for over 10 years, and it took them 13, 14 years in total to actually break the Assad government and collapse it. They think somehow they can do this with the Russian Federation.
And what big victory did that produce? What is better today than it was before all that Assad stuff?
It's better for Israel. So and this is why Iran intervened.
Hang on, no. Is it though? How is it better for Israel? What's different in terms of power dynamics that the weak Assad government had than what they have right now?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. As soon as Jolani took over in Damascus, 48 hours, Israel launched the largest array of airstrikes, hitting and destroying every Syria anti-aircraft battery in the country, every single base, took out their navy. So basically, even if Jolani inherited some, skeleton of the Syrian Arab army, there would be nothing left. So what happened? See, Iran had entered that fray in Syria years ago, as did Hezbollah. Okay, and the reason they did was quite clear for Iran and for Hezbollah. It was an existential effort to bolster the Assad government because they knew if Assad fell, if Syria fell, this would open a clear path for Israel to basically march along what's called the David Corridor, over air superiority over Syria to Iraqi Kurdistan to launch a direct attack on Iran. And guess what? They actually did that. So the Iranians were vindicated by their concern, which is a national security existential concern. So they did not want to see Assad fall. Likewise, Hezbollah, look at Israel. They occupy Mount Hermon. They have total command and control over southern Lebanon. They have the entire Golan Heights, which they'll never probably give back. And that basically means that they cut off Hezbollah's supply line to the south. Plus, they have firing control over Damascus and southern Lebanon. I mean, it was a complete game changer. That's what they wanted to do in 2013. Assad was supposed to fall in 2013. That's how long of a delay that operation was. And
can I just say this out loud? I mean, if you actually wanted not to have a threat from Syria, you could have just treated it like a normal country, and you wouldn't have had to worry about seizing all this territory and cutting off this other stuff. I mean, there were ways without using the military force that you would never have needed to do any of those, but I digress.
Yeah, they tried, and they sanctioned Syria harder than any other country in history, the EU and the United States. Is one of the most vicious embargoes on that. Not to mention the U.S. occupied all of Syria's oil fields in Deir ez-Zor in the northeast, so they couldn't even get their hands on their own fuel. Okay, so I mean, this is one of the biggest punitive operations against a country in history, and it took them that long to break it. How long will take them to break Russia with sanctions? I mean, will they ever break Russia with sanctions?
Yeah, I think we know the answer to that one. Or so I think we do, because Senator Graham's new battle buddy, Senator Blumenthal, says, hey, okay, well, while we're looking at this legislation here to try to designate Russia as a terror sponsor, let's dig back up our sanctions package that we want to use, because that will finally do the trick.
What we're watching right now in Europe is a slow motion Munich. Appeasement is not a strategy. We need scorching sanctions that will cripple Putin's economy by stopping the flow of money from India, China, Brazil, and others who are buying Russian oil and gas. The best way to bring Putin to the table and achieve peace is to cripple his economy.
The best way to bring peace and to have a negotiated settlement is to cripple the Russian economy. What say you on that?
Well, I mean, and Amy Klobuchar in the background there. I mean, it was what a ghoul fest that press conference was. That Howard Lutnick said the same thing. He said, "Oh, we'll do a peace deal, or we'll negotiate some kind of a deal with Russia, or India will get their trade deal as soon as they stop buying Russian oil." So they're trying to put the kibosh on India, and I don't think they're going to be successful. You can't have a trade war with the United States. Cannot have a trade war with India. That's the wrong country to have a trade war with, because the Indian economy is very, very well intertwined with the United States. And if they do that, then China's already lifting export restrictions on, certain sensitive goods and industries. Immediately, they moved to support India on that. That was kind of a move by Xi Jinping to say, look, we realize that things could get tough between you and the United States over this oil issue with buying Russian oil. And so we're going to make sure you're not going to be out in the cold. Let's open up more trade between China and India. And that's exactly what's happening. So again, Donald Trump doing great things for BRICS. I always said he'll get a plaque on the BRICS when they have their HQ. Should put Trump up in the reception when you walk in, like father of BRICS. Trump has done more. He has done more for BRICS in the shortest space of time than BRICS could ever do for itself, in terms of creating incentives for BRICS to be countries to come closer together and to do more, to cooperate more. I mean, right now, Russia and China are in the final stages of a new clearinghouse, like this, because the SWIFT system, Russia's been completely frozen out of, the SWIFT system in Belgium and Euroclear and all these other places where clearinghouses. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they will have their own bank. Russia already has its own SWIFT, but there'll be another clearinghouse, which I think will be based in China for these types of transactions. What's Blumenthal going to do then? What are they going to do? Are they going to sanction China? Are they going to sanction the Shanghai Cooperation Bank that have all of these different countries as members? I mean, that's half the world's economy right there. Just for what? Just to stick it to Russia? Are you serious? I mean, I don't think these people they don't really think, I don't think they're able to think out a lot of the things that they're proposing or the threats they're making. I don't really think they understand. I think they're going from one sort of gambit to the next. That's what Lindsey Graham is doing. It's like all these failed attempts to bring Russia to their knees. So that's just another gambit. They have to do this domestically. They have to be seen to be like tough on Russia, to be constantly making these announcements, but they're getting weaker and weaker in terms of what they're coming up with. I mean, the biggest hit Russia took already, in 2014 was sanctions after Crimea, and then in 2022 after the SMO was launched at the end of February with Ukraine. Those are the biggest shocks, the biggest hits you could deliver for any country or any economy, and Russia's managed to survive them. Not just survive them, but retool their economy so that they're able to weather very, very tough economic conditions and deliver a higher GDP growth rate than Europe, maybe than the United States. I don't know, but what is any of this going to do? I don't think it's going to do anything.
Well, let's look at one of the other things she said in that clip right there, especially at the beginning of it, that this is a slow motion Munich, that Europe is just submitting to Russia and they're doing nothing. Is there any substance to that?
No, and there's another one of those tropes, Daniel, which is, oh, it's Munich. This is the Sudetenland all over again. How many times did Nancy Pelosi say this after 2022? The Sudetenland. She's like invoking, pre-World War II Europe. And now they're pulling the Neville Chamberlain card. Appeasement. We must not appease. This is the Hitler of our times. We must all, band together to stop this fascist, brutal dictator that's going to roll across the plains of, Central Europe. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But they're recycling these to try to. I think they want to drum up some emotion. But the problem is the American public don't really have any enthusiasm for any of this, you see.
Yeah, I think that this whole Munich thing only works on like the boomers. Other younger kids just go, no file found. I don't even know what that means. So we'll see where that goes. But I tell you, somebody who apparently did get the memo and wants to prove their bona fides in Europe that they're not going to be Neville Chamberlain, and that is Ursula von der Leyen.
We simply cannot wait for this storm to pass. This summer showed us that there is simply no room or no time for nostalgia. Battle lines for a new world order based on power are being drawn right now. So yes, Europe must fight. This war needs to end with a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. Because Ukraine's freedom is Europe's freedom. The images in Alaska were not easy to digest. But just a few days later, European leaders came to Washington to support President Zelensky and secure commitments. Real progress has been made since then. And just today we have seen a reckless and unprecedented violation of Poland and Europe's airspace by more than 10 Russian Shahid drones. Europe stands in full solidarity with Poland.
So we will fight. Are they going to fight, though? I mean, how do they define fight? Do they want to get into a fight with Russia? And if they don't, what does she mean by that?
I don't know where to start with that speech. I mean, she was just rattling it all off. She's talking about a new world order based on power. Like, what do you think you're doing? What do you think NATO's doing? What do you think the United States is doing? They're trying to forge or extend the old world order, which is total power politics, entangling alliances, the concert of Europe, all of the conditions that led to the First World War. That's what the U.S. and the EU are sort of angling for over Ukraine. And the other thing, she's invoking the drones in Poland. This story has already been thoroughly debunked. But they're still running with these headlines. This is like Operation Gleiwitz 2.0. and there's only two drones. Two of these drones came via Belarus, more likely originated from Ukraine, and the other 10 or whatever came via Ukraine and into Poland. This wasn't the first time this has happened. And now, there's a few good journalists online. I've pinned or retweeted some of the recent investigations on this. Michael Cobbs, who is a top-rate researcher, I've also retweeted this on my X account. But there's nothing there. In fact, German media has been terrible on this. They've reported this. They're putting out pictures of homes in Poland with like the roof missing, saying that it was attacked by a drone, and the neighbors are coming forth and saying that was from a storm 2 months ago.
Oh man,
the damage.
Wow, didn't see that.
And just the insipid German media is just unbelievable, the stuff that they push out. So they're really quick to get the narrative going on this and saying, oh, we're in Article 4 consultations right now. That's a prelude to Article 5. We've got a potential crisis here. All of the EU leaders, Macron, Starmer, van der Leyen, Kalliakalis, Mark Rutte, all the same. This is a reckless, egregious attack by the Russians, almost verbatim. All of their statements came from the same central office. They actually have that in the G7. It's called the rapid response mechanism. It means for any big event, they all have to have the identical messaging on a major foreign policy issues. And this was one of those times when the rapid response mechanism was set into motion. They started that in 2018, by the way, when Theresa May was Prime Minister of the UK. That's when they launched the rapid response mechanism. It's all about the uniformity of messages and messaging, media messaging for all G7 members. That will include the leading NATO countries. So they've done that here. And the more we dig into this Poland story, the Belarus released their findings on this. They alerted the Poles about the drones. And they're even saying Belarus is taking credit, saying that their early warning allowed the Poles to intercept some of these drones that may or may not have gone astray. That Poland has not released any evidence of Russian drones yet. They put some images out. They floated a few in the media, but there's no definitive from a government agency yet. So there's a lot that we don't know. But we do know that both Ukraine and Russia were launching drone missions in the area, and that both of them, especially Ukraine, has the technology to divert drones, and they have done many, many times before, diverting Russian drones by spoofing the GPS data. They've been doing this for years. Ukraine's very good at this, by the way. But so we have this situation very similar to, you remember in November 2022 when there was an errant anti-aircraft missile from Ukraine that fell into Polish territory.
Yeah,
you remember that? The AP journalist completely jumped the shark on it, created a NATO Article 5 crisis, and all of a sudden they had to row it back because it was an errant Ukrainian interceptor missile that landed in Polish territory. And all the NATO people are saying, if one toe cap lands in Poland, we're going to triple. Attack on one is attack on all. They're all singing that, that tune. I mean, it's just they're doing it again here. This is not what they are portraying it as, and as the facts and the data come out, they will abandon this one very quickly.
Well, maybe not so quickly, because there's overnight there's been action. Actually, earlier today, you had the Supreme Allied Commander Grinkowicz, who said that we're now going to establish a new Eastern sentry to prevent further incursions of this. Here's how he put it.
Foremost, it will even further strengthen our posture to shield and protect the alliance. Allies stand in solidarity with Poland and are committed to this endeavor. We have already seen announcements on the deployment of forces from France, Germany, Denmark, and the United Kingdom, and we expect others soon. As part of Eastern Sentry, we will also work with Allied Command Transformation, as we did in Baltic Sentry, to rapidly experiment and field new technologies, such as counter-drone sensors and weapons. Poland and citizens from across the alliance should be assured by our rapid response earlier this week and our significant announcement here today. NATO will continue to defend every inch of its territory.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that NATO is going to defend its territory, but especially if what you're saying is known in terms of what actually happened by these people, then why are they wanting to jump on this? And now talking about deploying more troops into the eastern part of the alliance, closer and closer to Russia. Now setting up, this, whatever he's described here, this Eastern Sentry air defense kind of situation. What signal does this send to Russia? And because even like this one with Lindsey Graham talking about this sponsor of terror, every action usually has an equal and opposite reaction. What reaction do you expect this to have from Russia? Will they just say, okay, well, golly, I didn't know that the NATO had that kind of capability. Yes, we better back off. Or might it be something different?
Well, I think Russia's used to the West using fake incidents or fake or drummed up fake crises in order to sort of ramp up what they're doing. Mark Rutte was a NATO Secretary General. His immediate reaction was, we're deploying Dutch F-35s. We'll be sending AWACS. We'll be sending more Polish F-16 fighters into the fray, European air refueling tankers. So they're using this to escalate. But, you have to look at the timing of this and what is happening around this tri-national border area where Belarus, Ukraine, and Polish borders meet. Well, something has been happening which has created huge worries and concern at Brussels, at NATO HQ, and that Russia has begun systematically targeting Ukrainian arms manufacturing facilities in Western Ukraine, deep into Western Ukraine. And so now they're really panicking because they were relying on that as part of the strategy in order to somehow, beef up the Ukrainian military capabilities. And they've also invested significant amounts of money from the West, from the United States and other countries into building some of these capabilities. I mean, anybody who's watched this conflict for the last 3 years knows that anything like that, Russian intelligence is probably very good, I would bet, about who is building what and what's located in Western Ukraine. And it's just a few Kinshall missiles away from, turning into a heap of dust and rubbish. And that's what's happening. And as that's happening this week, you have this incident happening. Oh, and by the way, Daniel, you'll be interested to know that hours before these so-called drone attacks by Russia, Zelensky put in his request for 10 Patriot systems.
Batteries.
Yeah, batteries. Right. And he may have been in Poland when he did it. I'm not sure. But is that a coincidence? Then he does that and then that happens? I don't think that's a coincidence. So, I mean,
and he's been asking for that forever, and more than a year about these 10. I think it was 12 batteries he was asking for earlier, and they just don't. No one has them. No one has the interceptor missiles that are going to stock them anyway. I mean, there's already a dearth of those for ourselves. And in fact, I saw that earlier this morning. I saw Zelensky was upset about this Eastern Sentry because he said that's going to divert assets away from us. You're sending NATO assets closer to the Russian border. And then you're not going to have as many to give to us. So ironically, that didn't even make Zelensky happy.
But NATO, and I remember having this conversation with you before Christmas, that if the war was going to end right there, that NATO could declare a win. The West could declare a win because they've already militarized. They pushed the new front line for NATO right up to as far east as you could possibly go. And they've remilitarized all of that from Scandinavia all the way down to Romania. And that's a huge win for the military industrial complex. And literally, if the thing was called off today and there was a peace deal, Western leaders, I know it might be crass, but they could turn to the public and say, look at what we've done. We have built a defense line, the new Maginot Line for Europe. And then look at all the great defense jobs. They're already bragging in all these countries about all the great, well-paid defense jobs that this war is bringing to all these countries. So they can turn this into a win, even if it ended today. They could spin it into some kind of a victory.
politically, we'll say,
Yeah.
a word victory. But and right now, I'd take that if that means that the physical killing stopped. But unfortunately, those continue to go on apace. This last thing I want to talk about before we shift gears here is this morning on Fox and Friends, President Trump was asked, where is all this stuff? Because he keeps making all these declarations and all these deadlines that something has to happen by this time, and then 2 weeks here, 10 days there, whatever, and nothing ever happens. And so now the question was put to him, are you losing patience with this?
Look, there's tremendous hatred between him and Zelensky. Tremendous. It's I've seen it before.
But Zelensky says I'm coming to the table.
Well,
so
now he does. No, now
True.
he does. He wasn't coming to the table so quickly. You remember the famous...
So has your patience run out with Putin?
Yeah, it's sort of running out and running out fast. But it does take two to tango. It's amazing. When Putin wants, Zelensky didn't. When Zelensky wanted to do it, Putin did. Now Zelensky wants to, and Putin is a question mark. But we're going to have to come down very, very strong.
Well, I'm doing very, very. I don't know for sure what that means. I'm not sure that he does. What do you make of that?
He doesn't know what it means. I mean, they're saying, oh, well, what's it? Tremendous hatred between Putin and Zelensky. Tremendous hatred. No, Russia does not have any respect for Zelensky. He's not elected. He's out of mandate. And a couple of years ago, he was a failed vaudeville stage comedian who became president as a kind of national practical joke because he had starred in a sitcom called Servant of the People and then launched a political party called Servant of the People and threw his hat in the ring for the Ukrainian presidential race, I think in, 2019. And by some stroke of luck, and maybe not so much luck, it was very much, I think, there was a lot of money and backing from the biggest oligarchs in Ukraine and probably by the United States. They wanted him in. So, I mean, you can't compare him to Putin. Trump is talking about like it's an argument between two schoolyard foes or something like that. And he's just in there trying to, referee a sort of peace deal, break up the fight kind of. It's ridiculous. The way Trump talks about it, like he actually knows what's actually happening. I still, to this day, do not see any detail or substance in any of Trump's commentary on Ukraine. I really don't think he understands anything that's happening.
I think that was kind of exposed when, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where he revealed and admitted on television publicly that he thought 4 or 5 times this year that he thought he had a deal with Putin. And I keep thinking, on what planet would you ever think you had a deal with Putin unless you had agreed, President Trump, that Zelensky was going to sign over all the territory and then withdraw his forces from the remainder of the administrative borders of those 4 regions? I said, unless that was agreed to, I don't know upon what basis you would ever have thought that Putin was ready to do something against his own interests.
They're still lost. J.D. Vance just made a statement, I think, in the last 24 hours, basically saying he was making, it was some kind of a meeting or appearance or something. And he's saying, well, it really comes down to 2 things. One is territory and the other is security guarantees. And, there's 6,000 odd square miles that Russia wants to get their hands on, which they haven't conquered yet. And that's really the nub of the issue there. And he goes on about security guarantees. That's the vice president. So he clearly doesn't understand either. I don't think J.D. Vance quite understands it. There's no deal. There's no deal that they think that they're going to get or that they believe if that's the contents of the deal. No, the deal would be in the real world. In the real world, it would be you send your highly skilled, educated diplomatic team and your forward negotiation teams. You send them forward. You send them forward to prepare some kind of, the groundwork to see what you can actually do with Russia. That takes weeks and months. And then the Russians and the Americans behind the scenes will agree on some basic principles. Then they'll come to the second round. They'll finalize that. That's another couple of weeks or months. And then finally, they've agreed behind the scenes, already agreed. And then Putin and Trump and Zelensky show up and the book comes out and you sign the treaty. That whole process. That's how things worked in the world prior to Donald Trump assuming the White House. But Trump thinks that, he knows everything about everything, and that he can rewrite the rules of diplomacy and the rules of deal making and ignore all of the factors that led to the conflict to begin with. And by the way, he doesn't even think that any of that is relevant. That's the problem with these people. And I honestly think this is a recipe for, total failure. Whatever they say they want to do, they're not going to get it done. I don't believe they can do it. The Alaska thing, looking back at that, like what was actually achieved there? I don't know. It was a good photo op, and it kind of was nice to see them together. I admit, it's nice to see Russia and U.S. together, shaking hands, spending time together, talking on the same level. That was amazing. But what was the material result of it? In terms of advancing the ball.
I think that also kind of tailing off of what you said just right before you made that comment was that Trump, number one, he tells everybody, and I think he believes it himself, I solved 7 wars, ones that took 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever. I walked in and made a speech and the problems got solved. And I'm sure, Patrick, he has no earthly idea what any of the substances were that caused these wars to go on forever, if they're even really over. But he thinks that he can. So he thinks he can come and do the same thing here. And just with power of personality, which his acolytes tell him all the time he has, I think that he believes it. So he thinks he can come in and get that. But I mean, maybe, well, I was going to say maybe Zelensky can be moved by this. I don't think he can either. But Vladimir Putin certainly isn't ever going to sacrifice one of what he considers his critical no-pin lines and the things that are important for him for his security. He's not going to give on any of them from a position of power. So that's why all those things you just talked about, what has to happen before, ordinarily the heads of state would get together to sign something, because none of that's even happening. That led John Mearsheimer on our show yesterday to say, he goes, in my view, this will only be solved on the battlefield. It's not going to be solved in negotiations.
He's not wrong. I mean, that's the only logical conclusion you can come to, just looking at the lack of progress on the diplomatic front. And that lack of progress, I'm going to have to say, it's on the U.S. side. It's on the U.S. side, because the United States is just not coming at it from any kind of position of reality. Russia's game is very clear. Their program is very clear. Ukraine's program is pretty clear. They're not hiding anything in terms of what their priorities and what they want out of it. But the U.S. and the Europeans, I think, are distorting by this unreasonable and oversized support for Ukraine, really propping it up into a weight class that it doesn't belong in, geopolitically or militarily. And that's only going to be bad for Ukraine in the long run. And I think you really have to lay the responsibility of this at the feet of Donald Trump. Why? Because he came into office with a mandate. And arguably he captured a lot of votes. He captured a lot of votes on the basis of that he was going to end this war swiftly. And he even said that not only could he end it when he gets in office, he claimed that he was going to end it before he got into office. That's what he said to the voters. So all of us who are, desperate for change, we're willing to take a punt on Trump and vote this guy into office on the hope that he's going to at least come good on that one promise, because that's a hell of a statement he made. I'm going to end the war in 24 hours. I'm the guy, only I can do it. Biden's weak. I agree with all that. Biden's weak. Biden was a disaster. The Biden administration and the Obama administration, in many ways, are the architects of the destabilization of the situation in Ukraine. All that's true, but Trump was meant to be the antidote. So, I mean, there's a lot more expectations, and he has a lot more responsibility to do more to really advance the case diplomatically, to advance diplomat. He's not done any of this. I can't see any actual material progress on this issue in Ukraine. Nothing real, nothing tangible. What they did was lure parties to Istanbul a few months ago and then launch a sneak attack against Russia. That's what the United States can take credit for that. Operation Spider's Web, I'm sure they were involved in that on at least on the intelligence level, maybe more. that's actually a repeating pattern, is that anybody who's negotiating, whether it's Hezbollah, the Iranians, Hamas, or Russia, you enter negotiations with the United States and its partners like Israel, they'll go after your leadership and try to kill them during the negotiations.
Yeah, I'm actually going to get to that in just a second, but we have this interesting question here from one of our viewers. Said the West would have to capitulate so much to have an agreement with Russia, and meaning, and I interpret that as meaning we would have to acknowledge reality. Do you think Russia will have to defeat NATO, or how do you see the end of the West conflict with Russia? I'm going to kind of expand on that a little bit for the question for you. Is that I asked Professor Mearsheimer yesterday, what would happen? How would this be viewed in the West if the reality plays out the way it nearly certainly has to, that Russia would win? How would we react to that? So I guess kind of the same to you. If reality plays out the way it probably will, how is the West going to have, when we've set up our whole life and probably be close to 4 years of effort to defeat Russia, and then instead Russia defeated all of our plans?
I think the only possible angle for that scenario would be for Ukraine to drag NATO into a conflict with Russia. It has to happen that way. It's not going to be directly, between the Poles and the Russians, or the Germans and the Russians. It's not going to happen. They need, Ukraine is the only mechanism that that NATO has in order to fight Russia, and they must do it through Ukraine as a proxy. Likewise, Ukraine's using NATO, they're using the West, and the West is using Ukraine. So that's really the only path. And I don't think it can be successful. I mean, you can try lots of things, like the games with along the Polish border with drones and other similar things, to try to create some kind of a Article 5, style crisis. But I can't see Romania falling into the same kind of pit that Ukraine has, or any of the border countries along that line. Even Poland, I don't think it's possible. It's only Ukraine. They're so heavily invested. All the chips on one single country to make all of this work, to grow NATO, to give NATO relevance again, to keep European leaders in power, to keep industry booming in the defense sector. Yeah. It's all predicated.
My theory on kind of my answer to that question, I'd like your view on this in just a minute or two, is that all these countries, Keir Starmer, Mark Rutte, Macron, all of them, they know that they are never going to engage in a direct fight conventionally, because it could all too easily go to nuclear with Russia. And I think that they are just playing this whole thing, that they are going to use Ukraine and wring it until there's no more blood to come out of it, until their military collapses. And then they will say, well, we're not going to start World War III, so now we're going to go on this big, basically a new Cold War, and we're going to ramp up spending, and now then we can point to this really dangerous Russia. I don't think they have any intention of fighting Russia. I don't think they'll ever go to an Article 5, because they don't want to. They just want to keep this boogeyman out there to keep the gravy train flowing. What do you think?
I agree. That's the fallback position is another arms race, is another Cold War. That's the fallback position. I think a lot of Europeans and Americans are Lindsey Graham types are delusional. They really think that somehow they can squeeze a W by using Ukraine in order to, as a cudgel against Russia. That's been the plan from the beginning, and that somehow they can bait and lure them into some kind of a situation, or a false flag, or some kind of a dilemma that's going to somehow escalate the entire situation. But I agree, Daniel. It being in Europe myself, even being as far as Serbia recently, there is no desire or will, not in Hungary, not in Central Europe, not in Western Europe, to fight Russia. The only desire I see is like a lot of flamboyant rhetoric from certain political leaders and people who are desperate to virtue signal in European Parliament, or in their respective legislatures in NATO member states. But besides that, I really don't see the people in the electorate. I have not heard it. There's not war fever in the public. There's war fever at the political level. That's why what you said is probably more likely, is because when Kalliakalis or Mark Rutte, when they're making Friedrich Merz in Germany, when they're making all of these strong speeches against Russia and how we need to confront the Russians and Putin is evil, Macron's calling him like an orc or whatever he was calling him. The person they're really dog whistling to is I think the defense industry. They're also dog whistling to America. They're dog whistling to major stakeholders. That's who they're speaking to, because I don't think the public is into it. There's not a demand for or any desire for conscription. In Germany, it's very unpopular. This idea of going to war with Russia, very unpopular. But at the leadership level, you'd think they had some buy-in for it. I just think probably the public hasn't reacted. The backlash hasn't come yet on all this. I think France is feeling it. And this is why you're seeing a lot of political turmoil. There's a lot of frustration with Emmanuel Macron. And so, of course, what do these leaders do when they're failing in the economy, when they're failing politically at home? They ramp up the war talk. So, I mean, that's what's happening in Britain as well as, in Scandinavia is another one, Finland. I think the Finnish leader they dragged him over to Washington to do that school meeting with Trump in the White House, with all the European leaders. I think Stubbs or whatever his name was, easily forgettable. But Sweden is the same. They dragged Finland and Sweden into NATO, and really ramped it up just after the conflict began. And there was a lot of shuttle diplomacy between Britain and the U.S. and Finland and Sweden to try to push them to rubber stamp NATO membership as quickly as possible. And I think in retrospect, there's going to be a lot of buyer's remorse on that. But right now, the U.S. is building so much military facilities in Scandinavia. Finland is getting its share, Sweden as well. They're really militarizing these countries that used to be neutral.
Yeah, that's probably not going to go anywhere good. Listen, we're running low on time. I don't want to let you go before we get your view on some of these things in the Middle East. You talk about that we don't have it seem like a very good idea what we're doing in the European theater with all this, with the Russia-Ukraine war. Well, the same thing seems to be happening in the Middle East, is we don't seem to be driving anybody's train. Now, just real quick as a setup, earlier this week, there was a lot of diplomatic activity going on. President Trump had sent Witkoff to try and negotiate a ceasefire or an end of negotiation for the Israel-Hamas war, to try to get the hostages back. He was running into some difficulties, etc. And then I want to say it was on the 9th of September, the Israeli foreign minister from a meeting with Hungary said, hey, this war could end in a day. There's all this negotiations going on, and all Hamas has to do to agree with that, and then the thing can be over with, but they have to agree to it. So that's what he said, the foreign minister. Then, of course, the next day, there is an Israeli missile that attempts to assassinate the negotiators that his foreign minister was talking about. The President Trump's main negotiating head with Witkoff was trying to talk to in Qatar, and Netanyahu comes after the fact and says this.
We went after the terrorist masterminds who committed the October 7th massacre. And we did so in Qatar, which gives safe haven. It harbors terrorists. It finances Hamas. It gives its terrorist chieftains sumptuous villas. It gives them everything. So we did exactly what America did when it went after the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda terrorists in Afghanistan, and after they went and killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. Now the various countries of the world condemn Israel. They should be ashamed of themselves. What did they do after America took out Osama bin Laden? Did they say, oh, what a terrible thing was done to Afghanistan or to Pakistan? No, they applauded. They should applaud Israel for standing and up to these same principles and carrying them out. And I say to Qatar and all nations who harbor terrorists, you either expel them or you bring them to justice. Because if you don't, we will.
Okay, that I'm gonna come back to this, the second comment there at the end, his second comment at the end, or his final comment there. But let's back up again and tell me what you think about his comparison of Osama bin Laden with the Hamas negotiators in Qatar. Are they the same things?
First of all, the Hamas negotiators in Doha, in Qatar, that is the political wing. That's the political wing of Hamas. Okay, the Al Qassam brigades, the military wing, is based in Gaza. Okay, and they're fighting in armed by. I'll go by the United States. The UN Charter. They're technically, according to the UN Charter, they're fighting an armed resistance struggle against an illegal occupation. That's not my definition. That's the UN and multiple UN resolutions. So they're not the same thing. And by the way, where is the righteous indignation about the founder of Al Qaeda in Syria, the deputy head of ISIS, who is sitting as president in Damascus? Like, where is the righteous indignation there? If it's about, quote, fighting terrorism, it's not about fighting terrorism. What Netanyahu does, and this is a president who has basically shirked his anti-corruption trial. He's wanted by the ICC as a war criminal. His country's in the dock in the International Courts of Justice for genocide. And he's putting on this kabuki theater that somehow Israel is defending the world against terrorism. What Israel does and repeatedly has done is to assassinate the counterparty that they're supposed to be negotiating with, so that there's no one else to negotiate with, so that they can turn to the world and say, they just don't have any leadership, these Palestinians. They don't have anyone who can negotiate. They've done this time and time again. And so they're doing this now. And previously, one of the clips you said, or one of the people claimed, I can't remember who it was, this was President Herzog, the Israeli president, came to Chatham House in London and just said yesterday, the day before, that Israel has never rejected, has accepted every offer of ceasefire or peace from Hamas, and that it was Hamas that broke. This is a total boldface lie.
Well, and as a matter of fact, we do have one soundbite from that interview where the questioner said, "Hey, when you guys kill the negotiators, how's this going to get to a negotiated settlement?" And he, oddly enough, said this will actually help the peace process.
Was it just a great big signal to the world that there are no circumstances in which Israel will do any kind of ceasefire deal with Hamas, given the fact that if they turn up to discuss the proposal, you try to kill them?
So as was said beforehand, of course, I wasn't involved in or aware of the operation, but because I was traveling here, but I would say clearly that this actually can be an opportunity to get to a deal, and Israel made clear even yesterday and today that it's open and wants to get to the deal. The deal is the end of the war, the exit from the war, and a hostage deal. Let's analyze Khalil al-Khaya, for example.
Yeah, you called it a kabuki dance. That is just, that's more like a Twilight Zone deal that is so disconnected. You said, yes, he asked him, how can anyone have a deal with you when you kill the people that are there to negotiate the deal? And he says, this can help get a deal, and here are the terms. I mean, I don't, help me out here, man. How does that work in real life?
That has been the Israeli tactic for time immemorial, which is to eliminate the counterparty you're supposed to be negotiating with, and then again turn to the world and say, "Oh, we don't have anybody to go. We don't have a partner in negotiation," says Israel. They do this all the time. And the other thing they conveniently omit from all of their commentary and discourse, including Netanyahu, is they don't mention the fact that all of these potential negotiations with Hamas involve Palestinian hostages, of which there are upwards of 10,000 held and illegally detained without charge, including hundreds of children and many, many more women, in this chain of this gulag detention chain that Israel runs and has been running for decades. And that's been part of the negotiations. That's why the Hamas fighters, etc., took hostages on October 7th, so they could use them as leverage to get their people released from Israeli detention prisons. They're being tortured, they're being raped, etc. This is all well documented, and you can look at it in the Israeli press. They've documented the human rights violations that Israel's committed against Palestinian, we'll call them hostages because they've been kidnapped off the street in many cases and not charged, put in front of military kangaroo tribunals, and then held indefinitely in some cases.
I actually saw an Israeli press this week, actually, that there was a lot of anger in Israel because apparently some of their Supreme Court justices said that you have to feed these prisoners that you've taken and you can't starve them. So that's, I guess that validates what you just said.
Yeah, and so that's part of the negotiations. That never gets said. No one in America, oh, free Trump did it again. He said, we need to free the hostages, free the hostages. It's a great soundbite. But what does it actually mean? There's two sides to that, free the hostages. And Israel has killed so many of the Israeli hostages, have already been killed by Israel. And I'm sure they know the vicinity of where they are, but that hasn't stopped them from carpet bombing those neighborhoods, including the Bibas family, which everybody made a whole theatrical drama about in Israel and the United States. And it's been shown beyond any doubt that they were killed in the children and whatnot. Their remains were returned, but they were killed by Israeli strikes. And not only that, they're starving the population. So if you're intentionally causing a famine in Gaza, you may end up starving the hostages, the Israeli hostages. I mean, it's like common sense stuff. I don't know how.
One last question. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you short there, but the last part of that Netanyahu bit I played a second ago, where he just laid out to the entire Middle East and said, if you don't take care of these people according to what we think you should in terms of bringing people to justice, we will, no matter where they are. And on a CNN interview, I think it was yesterday, the Qatari foreign prime minister rather was interviewed, and he's not taking it too well.
The attack that happened on Qatar territory, it's happened on our sovereignty. This is number one. Number two, Qatar is a mediator that's been mediating many conflicts. Qatar, when Hamas office was established, was done with coordination, request by the Americans, by the Israelis. They've been using it as a communication channel for them, for Gaza, for all those years. And I'm sorry here, any Israeli politician who today is trying to, to portray himself that he's away from this happened under Netanyahu's government, under Bennett government, under Lapid government, under Netanyahu's government again. Any agency says that no, they are not involved, it's not true. Mossad, Shabak, and the Ministry of Defense were involved in that.
Yeah, so Netanyahu's sitting there and he's accusing Qatar of harboring terrorists, and then the Qatari saying, you asked us to do this. America asked us to do this. We're doing what you wanted, and then now you come and do this. Patrick, is there any limit to what the Israelis can say in profound violation and contradiction to known truths?
The answer is absolutely not. And what makes this even more ridiculous is the fact that Qatar is a U.S. ally. They host a major U.S. military, an important U.S. military facility for the entire Middle East. U.S. military footprint is predicated on cooperation and good relations with the country of Qatar. In fact, those U.S. forces in Qatar helped Israel during the Iranian missile salvos. Okay. And the British use that facility as well. They're flying rivets and all these other aircraft there. They're helping to sort of map the battle space in the sky, refueling, all of these things. So now Qatar even, what's the point of being a U.S. ally if Donald Trump or whoever the U.S. administration is can't protect Qatar from a direct strike from Israel against political officials, not militants? The militants are in Gaza. I mean, this is like basic stuff to try to explain to, Trump or whatever. The worst thing was about this is Trump put a tweet out, or what a truth or whatever he calls it, True Social. And it was just this groveling tweet that he put out saying that, I'm not happy with what happened, but it wasn't my decision. It was Netanyahu's. I mean, it's like total humiliation for a U.S. president. I mean, you're really hitting the lowest point. This is the lowest ebb you could possibly have, where you have absolutely no clout whatsoever. To me, this is just the ultimate humiliation for the United States under Trump.
Well, and let me ask, I mean, what is your view? Is this either that Trump is on board with what Netanyahu's doing, and so he just says these things because really he's in part of it, or is it because Netanyahu is calling the shots and Trump just can't do anything about it? I mean, which of those two might it be?
I don't know, Daniel. It could be either or, but both of those are unacceptable. Both for the United States of America, both of them are unacceptable because it's bad optics. It's not just bad because of what happened. It's bad because what does that say for other relationships that the United States has? Very tight cooperative relationships with Saudi Arabia, with Kuwait, with all of these other countries in the region, with Egypt, all of these countries in the region. Jordan is another one. Jordan. What if Israel all of a sudden gets a bee in its bonnet with the king of Jordan and just decides they're just going to launch an airstrike against something that they don't like in Jordan, or Jordan, the king says something bad about Netanyahu or whatever, or says he's going to bring humanitarian aid to the Palestinians or feed them. Oh my God, we need to launch an airstrike against Jordan or whatever. That's where we're heading, the total anarchy in the region. So all of these things, here's the point. This is the point. All of these agreements, treaties, relationships, both in the United States in terms of, free speech with students on campuses, or international agreements, or all of these international law, all of these things have been wrecked. All of these things have been undermined, have been clipped, have been sidelined, all to protect Israel. Everything. It's just, it's unthinkable. The amount of damage that's been done internationally to the international system, to the legal frameworks, to the Genocide Convention, to the Human Rights Convention, to the United Nations, all of it, to the U.S. Domestically. Marco Rubio's threatening people for, being whatever, supporting Palestine and deporting people for writing op-eds. All of this to protect Israel, going after countries with punitive sanctions, attacking your allies because of something they don't like, attacking South Africa for filing the case in the ICJ, sanctioning people, UN envoys so they can't come to New York. The U.S. has done all of this. Why? For one country, for Israel. And that's a country that is in the dock for genocide. I mean, this is just a really shameful episode in history.
Yeah, and Gary, if you can put that back up there, that True Social, because I think it's important. This is what you were talking about a second ago. This was a decision made by Prime Minister Netanyahu. It was not a decision made by me. And then he starts to go in a good direction, unilaterally bombing inside Qatar, a sovereign nation, a close ally of the United States that is working very bravely and hard, blah, blah, blah. But then he just shifts gears. However, eliminating Hamas, who profited off the war, is profit off the misery of those living in Gaza, is a worthy goal. Well, then you basically said, yeah, you attacked a sovereign nation. I didn't have anything to do with it. But hey, that seems cool. I mean, eliminating Hamas is a good goal. So I sent Steve Witkoff back out there.
It's a cop-out. And not only that, he didn't write that. I'll bet you that was written by the Israeli embassy or some Israeli communications person, because that's the same talking point. They say Hamas is profiting off the misery of Palestinians. It's a complete lie. All the money that goes into Gaza passes through Israeli hands, by the way, before it enters into Gaza. And they say that all the Hamas political negotiators are billionaires living in the lap of luxury in Doha. Have you ever been to the UAE or Doha? If you're in those cities, there is only one lap you can sit in, and that is a very high standard of living. They have modern apartments and accommodations. They're not going to be living in a tent.
There's only one lap to live.
Are they going to live in a tent in Doha Square? Will the Israelis be happy? Well, they could probably drone them if they're outside living in a tent. But the whole way they frame this with Hamas, the political wing is ridiculous. You know what? The Israel lobbied to the U.S. and Britain and European countries to proscribe the political wing of Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorists. And our governments capitulated and accepted that so that they could do exactly what they're doing here, kill them. And that's, if you want to really boil down the strategy of Israel, that's what it is. And so they don't have to negotiate. Then the political process is dead, that the other side can't have any political organization or representation. Everything is criminalized, including the Gaza Ministry of Health. Tom Cotton and all these people talk about the Gaza Ministry of Health, the people digging out bodies out from under the rubble from U.S. F-35 Hellfire missiles and so forth. They call them Hamas-controlled Gaza Ministry of Health, not a reputable source. The death tolls that they're citing are fake. It's Hamas propaganda. That's what our elected leaders have been doing consistently for the last 3 years. It's despicable.
Yeah, if anything,
it's criminal what they're doing. It's criminal.
Just look at the Lancet. But yeah, that's not a very pretty picture in terms of ending the suffering of the Palestinian people anytime soon. And I guess we're just going to have to keep doing what you and I are doing here and bringing a light to the truth and telling people, look, listen, at some point we're going to have to stand up and put some pressure on all these governments from the people, because otherwise they're going to continue going down this murderous path, and it's going to be a very dark future for us all indeed if we don't get that fixed.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Well, we appreciate that. Thanks so much for coming on, Patrick. I mean, this is a tough discussion today, but it's one that's desperately needed, and we really appreciate the clarity you bring onto it because our folks really appreciate that. And we suggest everybody go to 21stcenturywire.com. And the Sunday Wire with Patrick Henningsen there, you can see on the screen. You can get it more than you, as much as you want from Pat. You don't have to wait till he's back on our show again for all of our folks there. I know that lots of stuff on there that I sometimes go and watch it. But thanks a lot for coming on, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.